everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, June 5th, 2025, the day before the anniversary of D-Day. On June 6th, 1944, the British, Canadians, French, and Americans invaded Normandy and began the Western Campaign that, along with the Soviet Union, led to the fall of Hitler's Germany. So, an interesting anniversary coming up, especially given the fact that we're watching a war between NATO and Russia spin out of control. Notice what I just said. The war between NATO and Russia. Because it's no longer really, since the Ukrainian drone strikes, possible to call this just a war between the Ukraine and Russia. So I want to talk about that today because a lot of you have been emailing me and wondering what I think about the drone strikes. Now, I have addressed this problem in some of our recent vid chats, but some of you are asking me to do so publicly, which I'm going to attempt to do today. But first, a reminder, we do not have a vid chat tomorrow. That will be a week from tomorrow, but I've been following the weather very closely, and again, we're in that cycle where every single weekend we seem to get hit with rain and storms. We can't seem to catch a break, and they are predicting rain and storms for the following weekend. So please remember, if you're a member of the website, to keep your eyes peeled on any last-minute schedule changes that will be posted on the forum. All right, so I want to talk about this business of the Ukrainian drone attack on Russian air bases with reference to a recent article that appeared just yesterday in the United Kingdom, and I'm spelling kingdom Kingdumb, after the suggestion of one of our members that actually lives in that country. This appeared in the United Kingdom's Daily Mail. The headline of the article is Trump makes shocking admission about Ukraine peace talks after call with Putin. And I'm going to read a few paragraphs from this because this piece is a classic subtle case of unbridled propaganda. So here we go. Quote, Donald Trump announced on Truth Social that he spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin but acknowledged peace with the Ukraine, and it is the Ukraine Daily Mail, is not on the immediate horizon. We are not a Slavic-speaking language, and I wish people would get through their thick heads that the proper English usage is the Ukraine. We have definite articles in our language. On the call, please note the definite article, that lasted about 1 hour and 15 minutes, Trump disclosed they discussed the recent drone attacks by the Ukraine on Russia's air bases. Kyiv delivered a devastating blow to the Russian Air Force on Sunday, and Putin is now plotting revenge. Now notice the phrase, plotting revenge. The president, no, actually, folks, Putin is planning retaliation. That's what he's doing. The president also stated that Putin told him he plans to retaliate against the Ukraine after the recent attacks. Quote, and they're quoting President Trump here, quote, President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields, unquote, Trump disclosed, without details about whether he pushed back on the Russian leader. Now let me stop right there. Even if Mr. Trump did push back, that is not going to change anything that is being planned by Russia. That's the reality of the situation, folks. The reality of the situation is that NATO is losing this war, and the Ukraine is losing this war. Now, what that means, I'll get to in a minute. But to continue, quote, we also, and this is again Mr. Trump, We also discussed Iran and the fact that time is running out on Iran's decision-making pertaining to nuclear weapons, which must be made quickly. I stated to President Putin that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and on this, I believe, that we were in agreement, unquote. President Putin suggested he will participate in the discussions with Iran and that he could perhaps be helpful in getting this brought to a rapid conclusion. It is my opinion that Iran has been slow-walking their decision on this very important matter, and we will need a definitive answer in a very short period of time. So in other words, I want you to pay attention to that little bit of information, because what it means is that Mr. Putin is not, at least as far as Trump is concerned, or his administration is concerned, trying to back the United States into a corner. In other words, it's not cutting off all discussion. However, it is making it very clear that unless there is a Ukrainian acceptance of Russia's terms, essentially, there is going to be no end to the fighting. Now, let me draw your attention to two phrases in particular in this article that now follows. Quote, "The Russian tyrant has stayed out of sight since the attacks on multiple air bases in the Ukraine's audacious Operation Spiderweb, a top-secret mission some 18 months in the making, showing off the Ukraine's capability to stagger the Russian invasion." Now, folks, that's complete hogwash, number one, because nothing that the Ukrainian military or intelligence services did with these drone strikes did anything operationally against the progress of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. Nothing at all. What you saw, in my opinion, was nothing but a desperation move on the part of the Ukraine, very similar in nature to the end of World War II and the German V-2 rocket strikes on London. They were doing lots of damage to civilian targets. They were creating a nightmare and a headache for the British forces, but they were not doing one thing at all to halt the operational progress of either the Western Allied or the Soviet armies that were beginning to make their way into the Third Reich. Nothing whatsoever at all. It was a desperation move, and that's what this is. But notice that in opposition to, quote, "the Russian tyrant," and I have to stop and ask, well, let's look at how they refer to President Zelensky. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been invited to attend the G7 meeting. Now, wait a minute. Didn't Mr. Zelensky cancel all elections in the Ukraine and declare martial law? That sounds like a tyrant to me. Didn't Mr. Zelensky declare the Russian Orthodox Church illegal and shut down churches and imprison clergy? That sounds like a tyrant to me. So come off of it, UK Daily Mail, and acknowledge the fact that the West is backing an equally tyrannical regime as you assume that of Mr. Putin to be. Period. It continues in this vein for quite some time. Toward the end of the article, we get this statement, quote, "The Kremlin wants the Ukraine to vow not to be a part of any military alliance such as NATO, restrictions on the size of its military, wants to keep their occupied regions of Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye, and wants the Ukraine, and wants Russian to be the Ukraine's official language." And again, that's a misrepresentation, in my opinion, from what I've heard. Russia does not want Russian to be the official language of the Ukraine. They want it to be recognized to be one of the official languages of the Ukraine, and there's a mighty difference between the two. And you recall what set all of this off was the United States overturning the election of a pro-Russian Ukrainian president and substitution of this hideous regime that we have in Kyiv now. And as you can tell, folks, I'm hopping mad about what I see going on. So what happened shortly before the Ukrainian drone strike on the Russian air bases? And many people have said, oh, the Russians were so stupid they kept all of their bombers on their air bases closely packed together and right out into the open. What kind of military thinking is that? Well, folks, Russia was obeying the the terms of the treaty with the United States to base all of its bombers out in the open so that the satellites can see them. So in other words, again, and we're going to get back to this, it was the West that took advantage of the Russians obeying treaty terms and to destroy their parts of their air force. So let's look at the Ukrainian drone strike against the Russian airfields. Not only was this a desperation move, in my opinion, not only did it not do anything operationally to the Russian military forces against the Ukraine, it could not have carried out those strikes without Western assistance and intelligence, and particularly the satellite directions that they had to get from the West. Now, where did that come from? The Trump administration is saying they knew nothing about it. I tend to agree with them. However, we'll get back to why I think that in a minute. But the satellite direction had to come from someplace in the West, along with intelligence capability, with boots on the ground inside of the Russian Federation. And this has to come, from, in my opinion, from one of four places: either the United States intelligence and satellite reconnaissance network, or the British, or the French, or the Germans. Perhaps all of them acting somehow in concert. But we have the Trump administration's denial of knowledge or foreknowledge that this attack took place. But you'll recall that shortly before the attack took place, Senator Lindsey Graham Cracker, as I like to call him, the warmonger, had time for another one of his junket visits to Kiev. Now, by the way, this is the same Senator Lindsey Graham that has had no time whatsoever to go visit the hurricane victims in the Carolinas. None. Hasn't been there once. But he has time to go warmonger in the Ukraine. Now, I suspect that what that visit tells me, is that yes, there was some sort of active cabal inside of the American intelligence community and satellite reconnaissance community that may have independently acted without and apart from executive oversight from President Trump. In other words, we're dealing once again with a rogue faction within the intelligence community within this country, and I strongly suspect within the European powers, that is trying to drive this whole thing towards a war with Russia. This is not a war that on any conventional scale or model that NATO can win, because we do not have the manufacturing infrastructure to sustain such a war that is anywhere as close to what would be needed as Russia has. So I suspect that there was cabal use of these NATO satellite assets, but no direct involvement of Trump, and that should give you great alarm. Because this means effectively, and in my opinion, that Mr. Trump has not got control or complete control over his own foreign policy. Other forces are driving it, and he's not in control. And that's a bad situation. Now, you'll notice that Putin's responses in the article that I just read you indicate that he's willing to maintain open contact with the Trump administration vis-a-vis other problems that the two countries face, namely a nuclear Iran. But on the issue of the Ukraine, no. The United States has botched that. So what does all this mean? Well, the weak foreign policy means that the Russian term for the West and for the United States in particular as not being agreement capable or not agreement capable has assumed a new meaning, because the older meaning was that the United States simply never lives up to and constantly breaks its treaty agreements. However, the new meaning is, in view of what I'm arguing here, that Mr. Trump is losing or has lost control of his foreign policy or is too weak in asserting his control over it, means that any agreement that the United States makes is an agreement of a weak administration that cannot enforce it. So in my opinion, what Mr. Trump has to do to rescue this situation is he needs to assert some really strong action, both vis-a-vis NATO and vis-a-vis the Ukraine. My recommendation personally, stop all aid instantly to the Ukraine. Stop all of it instantly to the Ukraine. This is a tyrannical regime with absolutely no respect, in my opinion, for the human rights of its Russian subjects and citizens. And that's what started all of this in the first place. Now, the Trump-Putin phone call is, I think, the indicator of the weakness of the administration. So my recommendation to Mr. Trump, and I'll be frank, folks, I've lost patience with this whole Ukrainian mess. It is completely and totally unnecessary. And it is that cabal of globalist neocons that got us into this mess and put the Ukraine into this mess. And what I think the United States must do is instantly and immediately begin reassessing its whole tapestry of post-war alliances, particularly with the European powers, and particularly vis-a-vis the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Frankly, I think we need to get out of NATO, let the Europeans run it, let them take care of their own defense, and if they want to start wars with Russia, let them go ahead and do it and suffer the consequences. So I think we need to get all the way out of NATO. We're watching these lesser powers in Europe wag the dog, and we've got enough wag the dog relationships with a certain other country in the world that we don't need either. So it's time to take George Washington's advice, get out of these entangling alliances, because all they do is drag us into unnecessary wars and devastate their own countries in the process. Now, there's one final thing to note. Like it or not, Russia will finish this. And what Mr. Putin's call to Mr. Trump, I think, really means is, we're sorry, we've given you every opportunity, and we've given the Ukraine every opportunity to come to terms with our demands for a ceasefire, and they are simply not listening. Zelensky knows he doesn't have to listen so long as he has the backing of at least one or two of the major European powers, and so long as he knows that the Trump administration's foreign policy grip is very weak. But Russia will finish this. What that means is that Russia is going to have to go all the way. And what they're going to have to do is do so in such a way to depose the Zelensky regime. Now, either going all the way means operationally and militarily to remove that regime, or it means an intelligence effort to get rid of the Zelensky regime and bring in people inside the Ukraine that are fed up with that regime. But in any case, Russia, like it or not, is now in the nation-building business. In my opinion, they're going to have to go all the way and take it out. and bear the expenses of installing a new regime that is amenable to Moscow and that will keep the Ukraine neutral and pursue policies that will keep it out of NATO and the EU. Otherwise, it's a military occupation, and no one wants that. So that's my thinking, folks. I think it was a desperation move. It did not do anything whatsoever operationally to halt the Russian military advance. And as far as the Russian air forces and airplanes that were hit, what it's done is it's removed a lot of obsolescent aircraft from the Russian inventory that will be replaced with nice new modern stuff. So, in effect, it really accomplishes nothing. Other than it shows just exactly who's really calling the shots. The Ukraine could not have done this without Western intelligence and satellite reconnaissance assistance. And that's very bad. What just happened was you are now fully informed that this is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. Mr. Trump, listen to your better angels and get the hell out of this warmongering organization called NATO. And by the way, I do some serious investigation of Senator Lindsey Graham Cracker and what he was doing over there and why he's conducting foreign policy and not Secretary Rubio. So that's it for my news and views. As you can tell, I'm angry and worked up. But and again, folks, I refuse to let the politicians in Kyiv dictate to me how the English language should work. Buck up, Ukrainians, because in our language it is the Ukraine. And for politicians to cave and alter the tenets of our own language's grammar on the basis of your demands that we do so, I ain't playing along. So, there we go, folks. Don't forget, no vid chat tomorrow. Keep your eyes peeled on the forum for any weather updates. We will have our next vid chat a week from tomorrow. And bye-bye, everybody, and God bless. We'll see you on the flip side.